My name is Freeman, 32 years old, and what I thought was a successful software developer with a secure future. Last month, I finally accepted an invitation to our family reunion after 5 years of distance. The day after our seemingly heartfelt reconnection, I checked my savings account and found all $67,000 gone. When I confronted my father, he just shrugged and said, "We needed it," like he was borrowing a lawnmower, not stealing my entire future. That moment changed everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and what I was capable of doing to get justice. Before I continue with this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to learn the hard way that blood ties sometimes come with hidden price tags. Growing up, I never had what you would call a normal relationship with my father. Richard Walker was always emotionally distant, the kind of man who showed love through occasional gifts rather than consistent presence. My mother, Sarah, compensated by being overly accommodating, always smoothing things over whenever Dad disappointed us. Their dynamic was toxic, but as a kid, I thought it was normal. When I was 16, their marriage finally imploded. I came home from school one day to find my mother sobbing at the kitchen table. Dad had emptied their joint account and disappeared for 2 weeks. When he returned, it was only to collect his things. The divorce was ugly, with Dad fighting for assets but not custody of me or my younger sister Abigail. Even before the divorce, Dad had a long history of financial irresponsibility. There were always mysterious investments that never seemed to pay off. He would be flush with cash 1 month, then borrowing from my mom the next. I later learned he had a serious gambling problem that he managed to hide for years. Poker, sports betting, even underground games in hotel rooms when he was supposed to be on business trips. After my parents split, I made a promise to myself that I would never end up like my father. I worked part-time jobs through high school to save for college. Unlike many of my friends who got cars or allowances, I had to earn every dollar. When I was accepted to State University, I received minimal financial support from either parent. Dad claimed he couldn't afford it, despite somehow managing to buy a new truck that same year. I took out student loans and worked 20 to 30 hours a week at the campus IT help desk while maintaining a full course load. 4 years of minimal sleep and maximum effort. While other students were partying, I was either studying or working. It paid off when I graduated with a computer science degree and landed a junior developer position at a growing tech firm in Boston. The first 3 years of my career were dedicated to paying off my student loans. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with secondhand furniture and cooked almost every meal at home. No vacations, no fancy clothes, no new car, just work and saving. By 28, I was debt-free and finally started building my savings. Every bonus and raise went directly into my account, earmarked for eventually buying a house and maybe starting a family of my own someday. During these years, contact with my father dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional text. My mother remarried a kind, stable insurance adjuster named Bill and seemed happy. My sister moved to California for work. Our family, what was left of it, was scattered but peacefully distant. 5 years ago, that fragile peace was disturbed when Dad called asking for a loan of $5,000 for a sure-thing investment. I refused, which triggered a massive argument where years of resentment spilled out from both sides. He called me selfish and ungrateful. I called him an irresponsible conman who never learned from his mistakes. We didn't speak again after that call until 3 months ago, when the invitation arrived for a family reunion at Dad's new lake house in Michigan. I was surprised to learn he had remarried as well, to a woman named Stephanie. The invitation was handwritten with a personal note saying he wanted to make amends and reconnect with family. It mentioned that he had turned things around and wanted to start fresh. My initial reaction was to throw it away. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity about this apparent transformation. Maybe it was the childish hope that still lingered that my father could change. Or maybe it was just the pandemic isolation making me crave family connection of any kind. After a week of deliberation, I called and accepted the invitation. Looking back, I should have trusted my first instinct. Some people don't change. They just find new ways to disguise the same old behaviors. But I wanted to believe, and that need to believe my father could be better, would cost me almost everything. The drive to my father's lake house took about 3 hours from my apartment in Chicago. With each mile, my anxiety grew. Was I making a mistake? Should I have maintained the distance that had kept me safe for years? But then I turned onto the private road leading to the property, and my worries temporarily subsided, replaced by surprise. The house was impressive, far nicer than anything my father had owned during my childhood. It was a sprawling 2-story cedar cabin with a wraparound porch, situated on what must have been at least 2 acres of lakefront property. A new black SUV and a boat sat in the driveway. This apparent prosperity confused me, considering his history of financial instability. As I parked my modest Toyota, several relatives I hadn't seen in years were already milling around the property. There was Uncle Jim, Dad's older brother, with his wife Debbie, 3 cousins I vaguely remembered from childhood holidays, my grandmother Ruth, now using a walker but still sharp as ever, at 85, and a few people I didn't recognize at all, presumably from Stephanie's side of the family. Dad emerged from the house as I was retrieving my overnight bag from the trunk. He looked different, healthier somehow. He had lost weight, and his previously salt and pepper hair was now colored a uniform dark brown. He wore an expensive-looking polo shirt and designer sunglasses. "Freeman, you made it!" he called out, approaching with arms wide. The hug he gave me felt foreign, uncomfortable. We had never been a hugging family. "Nice place," I said, pulling away and gesturing toward the house. "Thanks, son. Things have been good the last few years. Really good. Come on in. Stephanie is dying to meet you." Inside, the house was just as impressive. Vaulted ceilings, hardwood floors, granite countertops in the kitchen, expensive furniture that looked barely used, family photos on the walls, including several of me from high school and college that I had no idea how he had obtained. Stephanie turned out to be a slim, attractive woman with carefully maintained blonde hair and a practiced smile. At 40, she was only 8 years older than me, which was jarring. She greeted me with the over-enthusiastic warmth of someone trying too hard to make a good impression. "Freeman, Richard talks about you constantly. The brilliant son, the computer genius." She hugged me as if we were old friends rather than complete strangers. "You have to tell me all about your work in." "What is it? Software design?" "Software development," I corrected, already feeling the discomfort of forced familiarity. The day progressed with typical reunion activities. A barbecue lunch on the deck, swimming in the lake, catching up with relatives who felt like strangers. Throughout it all, Dad played the role of successful family patriarch, telling stories, making sure everyone's drinks were full, showing off his boat and property. During a lull in the afternoon, while most people were swimming or napping, Dad pulled me aside for what he called a private chat between men. We sat in his home office, another surprisingly luxurious room with leather furniture and what looked like original artwork on the walls. "I'm really glad you came, Freeman," he said, pouring 2 glasses of expensive-looking scotch. "It means a lot to me." I was surprised to get the invitation, I admitted, accepting the drink but not sipping it. "It's been a long time. Too long. And that's on me. I know that." He settled into his chair with a sigh that seemed rehearsed. "I wasn't the father you deserved when you were growing up. I made mistakes, a lot of them." The admission, something I had waited years to hear, should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt hollow, like he was reading from a script. "Anyway," he continued, "that's the past. I'm more interested in the future, our future, rebuilding this relationship." He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "and maybe doing some business together." There it was. I should have known. "Business?" I asked, keeping my face neutral. "I've got this investment opportunity. A real estate development near Tampa. The returns are incredible, like 30% in the first year alone." His eyes had that familiar gleam I remembered from childhood, the one that preceded every financial disaster. "I've already got most of the capital, but I need another $75,000 to secure the best waterfront lots before they're gone." "And you want me to invest?" I kept my voice even, hiding my disappointment. Just a small loan, really. I'd pay you back in 6 months, with interest. It's a sure thing, Freeman. The familiar phrase, sure thing, triggered all my old warning systems. I politely declined, citing my savings being tied up in long-term investments. He seemed to accept this with good grace, though I noticed a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. That evening, the reunion culminated in a large dinner on the patio. Tiki torches and string lights created a festive atmosphere as 20 of us crowded around tables laden with catered food. Dad stood to give a toast, champagne flute in hand. "To family," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "The most important thing in life, the people who support each other, no matter what." His eyes found mine. The people who forgive past mistakes and build new futures together. Everyone clinked glasses. I sipped my champagne and allowed myself, just for a moment, to believe that maybe this was genuine. Maybe he had changed. Maybe we could have some kind of relationship moving forward. After dinner, several of us went swimming again, taking advantage of the warm night and the lighted dock. I remember leaving my wallet and phone in my jeans, carefully placed on a deck chair. I remember checking that they were still there when I came back to dry off. What I don't remember is checking that everything inside the wallet was intact. The night ended on what felt like a positive note. Dad hugged me goodbye, as I had decided to stay at a nearby hotel rather than in the house. "This is a new beginning for us," he said, and fool that I was, I believed him. I woke up early the next morning in my hotel room, a habit from years of strict work schedules. Before even showering, I checked my bank app as I did every morning, a ritual born from years of careful financial management. The app opened normally. My checking account showed the expected balance. But when I switched to my savings account, the screen showed $0 available balance. I blinked, assuming it was an app glitch, and closed and reopened it. Same result, $0. My heart began to race as I logged into the bank's website on my laptop for confirmation. The savings account that had held $67,000 the previous day was empty. A single transaction showed a transfer to an account I didn't recognize, time-stamped at 3:42 p.m. the previous day, right when I had been swimming. "This has to be a mistake," I said aloud to the empty room. I immediately called the bank's customer service line, my hand shaking as I navigated the automated menu to reach a representative. "I need to report an unauthorized transaction," I told the customer service agent, trying to keep my voice steady. 20 minutes and several security questions later, the agent confirmed my worst fear. "Yes, Mr. Walker. We have a transfer authorization form with your signature, submitted yesterday afternoon at one of our branch locations in Grand Rapids. The funds were transferred to an account at First Midwest Bank." "That wasn't me," I said, my voice rising. "I never signed anything. I was at a family reunion all day." "I understand, sir. I'm going to transfer you to our fraud department." As I waited on hold, I pulled my wallet from the nightstand to check my ID. My driver's license was there, but something felt off. I emptied the contents onto the bed and realized my backup credit card was missing. So was my Social Security card, which I normally didn't carry, but had brought for this trip because I'd planned to visit a local bank branch to discuss investment options. A cold realization washed over me. I had been targeted, specifically and intentionally. This wasn't random identity theft. This was planned. The fraud department representative was professional but not particularly hopeful. Yes, they would investigate. Yes, they would put a freeze on any further transactions, but the money had already been transferred and likely moved again. Recovery would depend on how quickly they could trace it. After hanging up, I checked my email, looking for transaction alerts that should have been sent. Nothing in my inbox. I checked my trash folder and found several deleted emails from my bank, sent the previous afternoon and promptly deleted. Someone had accessed my phone as well. I tried to reconstruct the timeline in my head. Yesterday, during the afternoon swim, I had left my wallet and phone on a deck chair. I remembered checking that they were still there when I returned, but I hadn't looked inside the wallet. Someone must have taken photos of my ID and cards, maybe even made quick physical copies. They had accessed my phone long enough to install spyware or steal credentials. The only people with opportunity and motive were at that reunion, and given the personal investment pitch just hours before, I knew exactly who was responsible. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial my father's number. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I texted, "Call me immediately about the money taken from my account." No response. I tried Stephanie's number, which had been included on the reunion invitation. Straight to voicemail as well. I called my bank again, this time to report my cards stolen and place a freeze on all my accounts. Then, I called my credit card companies to do the same. I contacted the 3 major credit bureaus to place fraud alerts on my credit reports. Basic identity theft protection steps that felt woefully inadequate given the magnitude of what had happened. Sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, I began to hyperventilate as the full impact hit me. My entire savings was gone. Years of careful frugality and planning erased in a single afternoon. By my own father, I had a modest checking account with enough to cover a few months of expenses and some retirement savings I couldn't access without penalty. But the house down payment fund, the emergency fund, the security I had worked so hard to build, it was all gone. A wave of nausea hit me, and I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, forehead pressed against the porcelain, I felt a sense of violation and betrayal so profound it was physical. But beneath the shock and sickness, something else was building. Rage. Cold, clarifying rage. I stood up, rinsed my mouth, and looked at myself in the mirror. He's not getting away with this, I told my reflection. I packed my bag, checked out of the hotel, and headed for my car. It was time for a confrontation. The 3-hour drive back to my father's lake house felt like an eternity. My mind cycled through disbelief, rage, and strategic planning. Part of me hoped there was an explanation, some misunderstanding that would make sense of the violation. The rational part knew better. I tried calling both my father and Stephanie several more times during the drive. All calls went to voicemail. I left increasingly direct messages. "I know what you did," and finally, "I'm coming to get my money back." It was just after noon when I pulled into the long driveway of the lake house. The festive atmosphere of the previous day was gone. Most of the relatives had departed. Only my father's black SUV and Stephanie's red convertible remained in the driveway. I parked behind the SUV to block it in and walked to the front door. My knock was more like pounding. After a minute, Stephanie opened the door, wearing yoga pants and a surprised expression that quickly morphed into wariness. "Freeman, did you forget something?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes darted past me to the driveway arrangement. "Where is he?" I demanded, pushing past her into the house. "Richard is in the kitchen. What's wrong?" She followed me as I strode through the living room. My father sat at the kitchen island, calmly eating a sandwich and scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I entered, and I searched his face for guilt, shame, anything that would indicate recognition of what he had done. There was nothing but mild annoyance at the interruption. "You stole my money," I said, my voice shaking with the effort to control it. He took another bite of his sandwich, chewed, and swallowed before answering. "Good morning to you too, son. $67,000. Transferred yesterday afternoon from my savings account, with forged documents." He put down his sandwich and wiped his hands on a napkin, unhurried. "Sit down, Freeman. Let's talk about this like adults." "Like adults? Adults don't steal from their children." I said, "Sit down." His voice hardened into the authoritative tone that had cowed me as a child. This time, it had no effect. "No, I want my money back. Now." He sighed, exchanging a glance with Stephanie, who had positioned herself by the kitchen door. "We needed it," he said, as if that explained everything. 3 words, "We needed it." As if he were borrowing a cup of sugar or a few dollars for gas. We needed it. "You needed my entire savings? For what?" "I got into some trouble with some investors. Gambling debts, if you want the truth. People you don't want to owe money to." He shrugged. "The real estate opportunity I mentioned is real, but I need to clear these debts first. These aren't the kind of people who give extensions. So you stole from me instead of facing the consequences of your actions." Again, I could feel my pulse in my temples, my vision narrowing to just his face. "I would have paid you back," he said, a hint of defensiveness entering his voice. "Once the Tampa deal comes through." "There is no Tampa deal, is there? It's just another con, like everything else in your life." His expression hardened. Watch your tone, boy. You don't understand how the real world works. Sometimes you have to take opportunities when they present themselves. Opportunity? You call stealing from your son an opportunity? The money was just sitting there, Stephanie interjected, moving to stand beside my father. Richard said, "You have a good job. You can earn it back. We're talking about our lives here. These people Richard owes, they don't make threats. They take action." I turned to look at her, this woman I had met less than 24 hours ago, who was now justifying the theft of my life savings. "You knew about this? You helped him?" She had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but her chin lifted defiantly. "Family takes care of family." "I'm his family," I shouted, slamming my hand on the counter. "That money represented years of my life, my future." "You're young," she said dismissively. "You have time to earn it back. Richard doesn't." I turned back to my father, who was watching this exchange with detached interest, as if observing strangers arguing. "How did you do it? How did you get access to my accounts?" He actually smiled then, a small, proud smirk. "You always were careless with your belongings, Freeman. Left your wallet right there on the deck chair. And your phone password is still your high school graduation year. Predictable." The casual way he described violating my privacy and finances pushed me over the edge. I lunged across the counter, grabbing his shirt collar. "You son of a..." He shoved me back hard, sending me stumbling. "Don't make this worse than it needs to be," he warned, standing up. Though in his late 50s, my father was still physically imposing. "The money's gone, moved and divided. You won't get it back by causing a scene." "I'll go to the police," I threatened. "This is theft, identity fraud, forgery." He laughed, actually laughed. "And tell them what? That your dear old dad took money you practically offered by bringing your social security card to a family event? That I used the ID and information you carelessly left lying around? Good luck with that. It's your word against mine, and I've got witnesses who'll say you were talking about helping with my investment." I realized with sickening clarity that he had planned this from the beginning. The reunion, the reconciliation talk, all of it staged to get access to my finances. "Get out of my house," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Before I call the police and report you for threatening me." "This isn't over," I said, backing toward the door. "Not by a long shot." "It is over," he insisted. "Walk away, Freeman. Chalk it up as a learning experience. And if you're smart, you won't make trouble. These people I owe, they wouldn't look kindly on someone interfering with their payment." I looked from him to Stephanie and back, seeing nothing but cold calculation in their eyes. Whatever familial feeling might have existed was gone, if it had ever been there at all. "See you in court," I said quietly, my rage crystallizing into determination. "What was that?" my father asked. Leaning forward mockingly, I said, "See you in court." I turned and walked out, my steps measured and controlled, despite the turmoil inside me. As I reached my car, Stephanie called from the porch. "He's your father, Freeman. He gave you life. You owe him." I didn't bother responding. I got into my car, backed up to unblock their SUV, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing together on the porch, watching me leave. Not with guilt or regret, but with the satisfied look of people who believed they had gotten away with something. They were wrong. As I drove away from that lake house for the last time, I made a promise to myself. This wouldn't be like the past, where my father's betrayals went unchallenged. This time would be different. This time, there would be consequences. The next morning found me in the sterile conference room of my bank's main branch in Chicago, surrounded by printouts of transaction records and 2 security officers taking notes. I had barely slept, spending most of the night documenting everything I could remember about the previous 2 days. "So the signature on this transfer authorization is definitely not yours?" asked Marcus, the lead security investigator, sliding a document across the table. I examined the paper, seeing a reasonable approximation of my signature. Close, but with subtle differences only I would notice. Absolutely not mine. "I never signed this." "And you believe your father is responsible?" "I know he is." He admitted it to my face. Marcus exchanged glances with his colleague. "That helps our case. But I have to be honest, Mr. Walker, family fraud cases are complicated. The access was obtained through shared information, not hacking or technical breach." The police may view this as a civil matter rather than criminal. He stole $67,000, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. That's not a civil matter. I understand your frustration. We'll work with the receiving bank to try to freeze the funds if they're still there, but given the time that's passed, they've been moved. I finished for him. I know. After the bank meeting, I drove directly to the nearest police precinct. The officer who took my report was professional but clearly skeptical, especially when I explained the family connection. You'll need to file in Michigan, where the alleged crime took place, he explained. Using the word alleged in a way that made it clear he saw this as a family dispute rather than a clear case of theft. And I should warn you, prosecutors are often reluctant to pursue cases between family members unless there's overwhelming evidence. He forged my signature and stole my life savings, I repeated, frustration mounting. I understand, sir. I'm just explaining the reality of these situations. By the end of that day, I had filed reports with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, the Federal Trade Commission, and contacted 3 different attorneys before finding one who specialized in financial crimes. Lisa Daniels had a no-nonsense manner and a reputation for tenacity that I desperately needed. Your father made some key mistakes, she said, after reviewing my documentation. The forged signature, for one. The fact that he admitted taking the money to you directly, for another. But most importantly, the premeditation. The family reunion was clearly staged to gain access to your financial information. Can we get my money back? She was honest. Some of it, possibly. But financial recovery isn't guaranteed, especially if the money's been dispersed or spent. What we can definitely pursue are criminal charges for identity theft, forgery, and grand larceny. I want both, I said firmly. My money and justice. The next week was a blur of legal filings, forensic financial investigations, and emotional exhaustion. I took a leave of absence from work, unable to focus on coding while my life was in freefall. My small apartment felt like a cage as I paced, waiting for updates from banks and lawyers. One small breakthrough came from my own investigative efforts. I ran a security scan on my phone and discovered spyware had indeed been installed, likely during the reunion. The malware was sophisticated, designed to intercept verification texts and emails from financial institutions. This was not an impulsive crime, but a carefully planned operation. The evidence of premeditation strengthened our case enough for Lisa to file for an emergency injunction to freeze any assets in my father's name. But when the order was approved, we discovered his accounts had already been emptied. The lake house, we learned, was rented for the weekend, not owned as he had implied. The SUV was leased under a business name we couldn't trace immediately. Your father knows how to cover his tracks, Lisa observed. This may not be the first time he's done something like this. Her comment triggered a memory. When I was 16, he emptied my parents' joint account before their divorce. My mother never pursued it legally. Lisa's eyes narrowed. We should talk to your mother. There may be a pattern of behavior that could help our case. While legal proceedings slowly advanced, I faced practical realities. My rent was due. Bills needed paying. Without my savings cushion, I was suddenly living paycheck to paycheck for the first time since college. A friend, Marcus, offered his spare room when I explained the situation, a kindness that brought me to tears after weeks of feeling utterly betrayed and alone. Stay as long as you need, he said, helping me move the few possessions I could maintain without my safety net. We'll get through this. As the initial shock faded, depression set in. I blamed myself for trusting my father, for bringing my important documents to the reunion, for being careless with my phone. During therapy sessions, another expense I could barely afford but desperately needed, I worked through these feelings of self-recrimination. You were responding to a universal human need for family connection, my therapist explained. He exploited that normal, healthy desire. The responsibility lies with him, not you. Intellectually, I understood this. Emotionally, the betrayal cut deep in ways I couldn't easily heal. But as the weeks passed, my focus shifted from self-blame to action. I channeled my technical skills into tracking digital footprints my father had left. I contacted distant relatives to piece together his movements over the past years. I built a case, methodical and thorough. the way I would approach debugging a complex software problem. 2 months after the theft, our persistence paid off with a disturbing discovery. My father wasn't just running from me. A private investigator Lisa hired found evidence of multiple aliases and a pattern of similar financial schemes across 3 states. Richard Walker had reinvented himself repeatedly, leaving a trail of victims that included not just family members, but business partners and romantic interests as well. Your father is what we call a career con man, Lisa explained during an update meeting. The family reunion scheme is just his latest operation. But now we know what we're dealing with, and that gives us advantages. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. My father had underestimated me. He thought I would be too embarrassed or defeated to fight back effectively. He was wrong. The software developer he had dismissed as an easy mark was methodically building the case that would bring him down. And I was just getting started. 3 months after the theft, we had our first court hearing. It was a preliminary proceeding to determine if there was sufficient evidence to move forward with criminal charges. I sat beside Lisa in the wood-paneled courtroom, nervously adjusting my tie and trying to appear composed despite my racing heart. When my father entered with his attorney, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the confident, well-dressed man from the lake house. In his place was someone who looked older, wearing an ill-fitting suit and an expression of injured innocence. Our eyes met briefly across the room. He nodded slightly, as if we were casual acquaintances rather than a thief and his victim. His defense strategy became clear as soon as his attorney began speaking. They weren't denying the transfer had occurred, but were reframing it entirely. Your Honor, this is an unfortunate family misunderstanding, the attorney argued smoothly. Mr. Walker Sr. believed the funds were promised to him by his son as an investment in their joint venture. There was explicit verbal agreement during their reunion. My hands clenched into fists under the table as he continued. Furthermore, the younger Mr. Walker has a history of making promises he doesn't keep. He abandoned his family for years, refusing to help his father during financial hardships despite his own prosperity. This alleged theft is actually an attempt to renege on a family financial agreement. I was being painted as the villain, the ungrateful son trying to punish his father over a misunderstanding. The narrative was so twisted from reality that I could barely contain my outrage. Lisa placed a calming hand on my arm, her expression warning me to maintain composure. When it was our turn to present evidence, Lisa methodically dismantled their story. The forged signature, the spyware on my phone, the timing of the transfer during the reunion swimming activity, the emptied accounts and disappearance immediately after confrontation. Most damning was the recording I had managed to make during part of my confrontation with my father, capturing his casual, "we needed it" admission. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed with both criminal charges and the civil lawsuit for recovery of funds. It was a victory, but only a preliminary one. Outside the courthouse, a process server attempted to deliver formal lawsuit documents to my father, but he slipped away in the crowd. This began a frustrating pattern of evasion, with my father seemingly always one step ahead of legal summons. Lisa suggested hiring a private investigator, specializing in locating people who didn't want to be found. Samuel Peters was ex-law enforcement with 20 years of experience tracking fugitives. His services weren't cheap, adding to my mounting legal expenses, but I was committed to seeing this through, whatever the cost. "Your father is good," Samuel admitted after 2 weeks of searching. "He's using cash only, switching vehicles, and staying off social media. But everyone makes mistakes eventually." The mistake came in the form of Stephanie's Instagram vanity. Though she had blocked me, a distant cousin who followed her noticed a post showing a sunset view from an airport lounge with the caption, "New adventures await." A geotag had been automatically added, showing Orlando International Airport. Samuel was on a flight to Florida within hours. Through contacts at the airport and some investigative work that he assured me was mostly legal, he discovered my father and Stephanie had booked tickets to Belize, a country with limited extradition agreements with the United States. "They're leaving tomorrow morning," Samuel reported. "If they make it out of the country, recovery becomes much more difficult. Lisa immediately filed for an emergency travel injunction, but legal wheels turned slowly. Samuel took more direct action, alerting airport security to the presence of individuals under investigation for financial crimes. It was a gamble, potentially giving my father time to change plans if he was tipped off. The gamble paid off. The next morning, Richard and Stephanie Walker were detained at the TSA checkpoint. A search of their luggage revealed $60,000 in cash, fake passports under the names Robert and Susan Wilson, and documents for property purchased in Belize. The arrest made local news in Florida. Within days, my phone began ringing with calls from people I had never met, all with stories about Richard Walker, or Robert Wilson, or any of the half-dozen other names he had apparently used over the years. 3 half-siblings I never knew existed reached out, each with their own story of abandonment and financial exploitation. Jamie from Seattle, whose college fund had disappeared the same month she was accepted to Stanford. Tyler from Denver, whose mother had lost her home after my father convinced her to refinance to invest in a non-existent business. Caitlin from Atlanta, whose wedding fund had vanished along with my father 2 weeks before her ceremony. Former business partners came forward with tales of investments that were nothing more than elaborate Ponzi schemes. Women described whirlwind romances that ended with emptied bank accounts. A pattern emerged of a man who moved through life taking what he wanted without remorse, leaving devastation in his wake. Most shocking was the call from my mother, who finally revealed the full truth about their divorce. It wasn't just their joint account he had emptied. He had opened credit cards in her name, taken loans against her family's property, and left her not just emotionally broken but nearly $800,000 in debt. She had never told me the extent of it, trying to protect me from the ugly truth about my father. "I should have pressed charges," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "Maybe if I had, he wouldn't have been able to hurt so many others, including you." With mounting evidence and witnesses, the prosecutor upgraded the charges against my father to include multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and money laundering across state lines. What had begun as my personal quest for justice had uncovered a decades-long criminal enterprise. Stephanie, facing serious charges herself, eventually turned on my father in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony revealed that the family reunion had indeed been planned specifically to target me and 2 other relatives who had attended. My father had spent weeks researching our finances, identifying me as the most lucrative target due to my saving habits and predictable security practices. The most gut-wrenching revelation was learning that my father had been aware of my financial situation because he had been monitoring my social media and professional profiles for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Posts about promotions, casual mentions of saving milestones, all had been noted and leveraged against me. As the case expanded into a multi-state investigation, I realized that my personal loss, while devastating to me, was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of deception. My father hadn't just betrayed me. He had made a career of betraying everyone who ever trusted him. The trial of Richard Walker was scheduled for 14 months after the theft, delayed by the expanding scope of the investigation and my father's numerous legal maneuvers. I spent that time rebuilding my life piece by piece, both financially and emotionally. The day I testified against my father was one of the hardest of my life. Sitting on the witness stand, looking at the man who had given me life and then tried to destroy it, I felt a complex mixture of anger, grief, and eventually, a strange sense of peace. I told my story clearly and without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. My father never took the stand in his own defense. His attorney had advised against it given the mountain of evidence and testimonies from other victims. When the verdict came down guilty on all 27 counts across multiple jurisdictions, he showed no reaction, no remorse, no shame, no acknowledgement of the lives he had damaged. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 1 month later. In the interim, the court ordered liquidation of all assets that could be traced to my father's various schemes. The recovery process was complicated and incomplete. Of my $67,000, I eventually received back approximately $40,000. Other victims received varying percentages of their losses. When the judge announced a sentence of 18 years, there were audible sighs of relief throughout the courtroom from the assembled victims. My father would be in his 70s before he became eligible for parole. Stephanie, in exchange for her cooperation, received 5 years probation and a restitution order. After the sentencing, several of us victims gathered at a nearby restaurant, not to celebrate, but to share stories and begin a different kind of healing. My half-siblings and I marveled at the similar features we shared, the mannerisms and expressions inherited from a man none of us would ever truly know. He never saw us as children, Jamie observed, just as resources to be exploited, or obstacles to work around, Tyler added. But we're more than that, Caitlin said firmly. We're survivors. That evening formed the foundation of relationships that would become vital to my recovery journey. We created an online support group for victims of familial financial abuse, eventually expanding to include educational resources and warning signs. I used my software skills to develop an app that helped people protect their financial information from those closest to them, the people who might know their habits and passwords. 6 months after the sentencing, I requested a meeting with my father in prison. I wasn't sure he would agree to see me, but a letter arrived granting permission. On a cold Tuesday morning, I sat across from him in a sterile visitation room, separated by a scratched plexiglass partition. He had aged dramatically, his previously dyed hair now showing gray, his face gaunt and lined, but his eyes were unchanged, calculating and empty of genuine emotion. "You look well," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Still writing computer codes? Still developing software, yes." I studied his face, searching for some sign of the father I had wanted him to be. "I'm not here for small talk." "Why are you here then? To gloat? To see the old man brought low?" I shook my head. I needed to understand. Was any of it real? The reunion? The reconciliation talk? Was there ever a moment when you saw me as your son, rather than a target? He considered this, tilting his head slightly. "You want me to say I love you? That I'm sorry? Would that make you feel better?" "Only if it were true." A small smile played at his lips. "You really are my son. Always looking for the angle, the real story beneath the surface." "I'm nothing like you," I said, my voice hard. "Maybe more than you want to admit. That determination, the methodical way you built your case against me, the refusal to let it go, those are Walker traits." I hadn't expected this conversation to take this turn. There's a difference between determination and predation. He shrugged. "We all do what we need to survive. Stealing from your own child isn't survival. It's monstrous." Strong word. I prefer pragmatic. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You want to know if any of it was real? Here's your truth. I was proud of you. Not for the reasons you want, not for your achievements or character. I was proud that you had built something valuable enough to take. You were successful enough to be worth targeting. That's a compliment. In my world." The twisted logic left me speechless. After a moment, I stood up. "I won't be back. Your choice. But remember, Freeman, blood is blood. When I get out, maybe we can try again. Do it right next time." "There is no next time." I turned to leave, then paused. "You know what the real difference between us is? I can rebuild what was taken. You can't. You'll never have family, real connection, trust. You'll die alone." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of that prison knowing it would be the last time I ever saw Richard Walker. Whatever biological connection we shared had been severed, not by his theft of my money, but by his fundamental inability to value human connection over exploitation. The 2 years since that day have been a journey of rebuilding and redefinition. I've recovered financially, promoted at work, and even starting a successful side business based on the security app developed during the trial. The support group for family financial abuse survivors has grown into a national organization providing resources and advocacy for an often overlooked form of exploitation. Most importantly, I've redefined family for myself. My half-siblings have become close friends. My mother and I have healed wounds that long predated the theft. I've built connections based on trust and mutual respect, creating the family I choose rather than being defined by the one I was born into. When people ask me now if I regret pressing charges against my own father, I tell them the truth. What I regret is that it was necessary, but never that I did it. Some boundaries must be absolute, even against those who share our blood. The hardest lesson I've learned is that family is not an entitlement, but a privilege, earned through love, respect, and trustworthiness. Blood may create obligation in some cultural contexts, but it doesn't grant the right to cause harm. Sometimes the most important boundary we can establish is with those who should have been our safest connections. If you've stayed with me through this story, perhaps you've experienced similar betrayals, or know someone who has. Remember that survival isn't just about recovering what was taken, but about rebuilding something stronger in its place. Trust can be relearned, security can be reclaimed, and family can be chosen. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you through that process? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more conversations about healing from family trauma and building healthy boundaries. And if you know someone struggling with family financial abuse, share this video as a reminder that they are not alone and that recovery is possible. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your worth is not determined by those who failed to value you.